This isn't really my design of a duck carrier or goose carrier, but I decided I wanted to make one. So I started off with this old piece of leather that I had that's not very good, but I use it for a lot of little projects like this. And I cut a strip out that's 3 inches wide, and this one was 34 inches, but I think if I made another one, I'd probably make it 35 or 36 inches just to give me a little bit more room. You can see I'm just using a straight edge to make it as straight as possible. I don't have a industrial leather stripper or anything like that. That would make it a lot easier. And then I just divide it. I decided to make 4 loops on each side. And the reason why I came up with that is because where I live, the limit for ducks is 7. So I figure if I have 8, I should be good to carry a full limit. And then here I'm just using a punch to make some holes, just so that way it doesn't tear if I pry on it a little bit too hard. And I just made a template out of a piece of paper. And this is definitely optional. And if I did it again, I'd probably just leave it square. But it doesn't really matter. It's more of a cosmetic thing more than anything. I'm gonna double it up. This leather's not very thick, and so just to give it a little bit more volume, I just cut another strip to double it up, and I cut it a little bit big, and then I'm gluing it on here, and I'm using barge or barge cement, depending on how you say it. I've heard it both ways. It's pretty much just, it's kind of like a contact cement. And you're supposed to put it on, let it dry for a little bit on both sides, and then stick it together. But I'm not very good at following directions, so I just put it on there and clamp it and let it dry a little bit. I don't know if you noticed, but it looks really bad. It looks like mustard, almost like watery mustard. And I don't know if it's because it was so cold or if it's old. I don't know how old or how long I've had it. But I decided it just needs to hold it kind of temporarily anyways. So I just went with it. And then here I'm just kind of roughing out where I want my stitch line to be. And I have this Chinese-made cobbler's sewing machine. And it works pretty well for what it is. It's not the best, but it's much easier than sewing it by hand. And you'd probably get better results if you sewed it by hand. But if you've ever done anything like that, it's a pain. So it's just easier to do it this way. And then after I have it sewed together, I trim up the edges. And it's a lot easier to trim it like this than trying to get your 2 pieces lined up exact whenever you're sewing it. So anything you're sewing, make one a little bit longer and then just true it up to the other one. I'm just sanding the edges just to make sure that everything's good and uniform. And then I'm just edging it, taking it off, rounding those edges over. And this is all just cosmetic thing. I'm not going for the best look. This is just to carry dead birds, so I'm not too critical on it. And then I'm going to use the burnisher, and I don't know if you can tell, but my water's frozen, so I'm kind of having to dig at it. And so you can use water, beeswax. There's a few different commercially made products for edging or burnishing. The beeswax has to be warm though, and it's pretty cold. So I don't have very good heat source. So I just use some water. And then I'm going to put this D-ring on top. And so I'm just kind of using the D-ring itself as a guide. It ended up being about 1 inch wide, and then I'm just using a punch to punch out a place for that D-ring to go so it can have a little bit of room to move around. I'm just gluing it on, trying to find the center point. And then I'm just going to sew that in place. And then once I go to put the rings on, originally I was going to use some smaller rings, some 1/2 inch rings, but they didn't really fit on this strip, and I was going to have to trim them down. And you could probably see on one of those I did trim it down to see if it'd work, but it just wasn't sliding, so I just went to the next larger ring that I had, which I think it's a 1 inch, and it seemed to work just fine. I'm just using these little button rivets. They're not the strongest, but they don't have to hold a lot of weight. And so usually I use brass rivets for everything. I don't think they look as good, but they're stronger. You don't have to worry about them. And then I'm just throwing some dye on it just to make it look a little bit better. But like I said before, I'm not too concerned about how it looks. It's more for function more than anything. And then I just put a top coat on it. It makes it a little bit hard, and it just helps preserve it, because more than likely this thing is going to get wet a few times. I think that's called sheen. And then there it is. And then I just had that dog leash laying around, so I show you how it clips on. So you could clip that onto a backpack or anything. So I went out duck hunting, and there weren't very many ducks around like there had been. But the geese seemed to be moving. A cold front came through, pushed all the ducks out, but then it pushed some geese in. So you could see them flying over. I wasn't really set up for geese, but you know you gotta try whenever they're flying over you. So they're really, I shouldn't have been shooting because they were too high and they're flying too fast, but like I said, it's pretty tempting, and so you got to give it a shot. And so before this, I had been going out two or three times a week, and I'd shoot 3 or 4 ducks in about 30 minutes. And then, of course, whenever I go out and try to video, there weren't any ducks, or very few. So I ended up getting a goose, but of course my camera wasn't on whenever I shot it. And so there's it being used. And here's a little tip for you guys that don't like to wear waders like myself. I just use a fishing pole, collapsible fishing pole, and I put a snagging hook on it. And I could actually get them out further than these ones. I had these ones pretty close to the bank, and it wasn't very deep. But you could even throw those decoys out pretty far, and you don't have to go in after them. You can just fish for them. And so that's how I like to do it, because I don't know what it is, but I hate wearing waders. They're just not comfortable. Your socks are always slipping down. And so there you go.